Hey there, fellow TV lovers. Welcome back to Remember When. Now, I've spent countless hours getting lost in the glow of my TV screen, watching characters that felt like friends, families that seemed more functional than my own, and worlds that offered a perfect escape from reality. These shows shaped us, didn't they? The catchphrases we still quote, the hairstyles we might have attempted with varying degrees of success, and the life lessons we absorbed without even realizing it. But here's the thing about TV magic. Behind those perfectly lit sets and carefully crafted storylines were real people facing real struggles. Sometimes those struggles were heartbreaking, shocking, and in some cases, absolutely devastating. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 7 of the most tragic behind-the-scenes stories from shows we loved growing up. These aren't tabloid sensationalism or celebrity gossip. These are human stories that deserve to be remembered with respect and compassion. And this is Remember When. These are 7 tragic behind-the-scenes stories from classic television that'll change how you see your favorite shows forever. In the early 90s, there was one teenage heartthrob who had posters plastered across bedroom walls nationwide, Jonathan Brandis. With his boyish charm, he captured hearts as the genius Lucas Wollenjock on NBC's sci-fi series seaQuest DSV. At just 17, Brandis was on the fast track to becoming Hollywood's next leading man. Fan mail arrived by the thousands. Teen magazines featured his face month after month. He had everything: fortune, fame, and a future full of promise. But television fame is fleeting. When seaQuest DSV began losing viewership in its 3rd season, Brandis felt the shift. His screen time decreased, and the attention that had once overwhelmed him started to fade. Former castmates later revealed that Brandis took the show's declining popularity personally. He had tied his identity so closely to his career that when one began to falter, the other crumbled with it. In the years that followed, Brandis struggled to land roles that matched his early success. Each rejection chipped away at the confidence that once radiated from those magazine covers. Friends noticed his growing depression, but in Hollywood's culture of relentless competition, seeking help often feels like admitting defeat. On November 11, 2003, at just 27 years old, Jonathan Brandis took his own life in his Los Angeles apartment. The industry that had built him up as a teenage sensation had moved on to the next young star, leaving him struggling with a question too many child actors face. Who am I when the spotlight turns away? The tragedy of Jonathan Brandis reminds us that behind the confident smiles on our TV screens, there are often vulnerable young people navigating fame without a roadmap. His story forces us to question an entertainment system that glorifies young talent, only to discard them when ratings dip or when they outgrow their marketable years. In the late 70s and early 80s, diff'rent strokes brought us the picture-perfect Drummond family, with Dana Plato playing the role of Kimberly, the biological daughter in a household that showcased blended family love before it was a common television theme. While the show tackled very special episodes about serious topics, behind the scenes, Dana was living through her own very special and very difficult reality. Plato's journey to television fame began early. Adopted as an infant, she was pushed into TV commercials and auditions from age 7. By age 14, she was a household name on one of America's most popular sitcoms, with all the pressure and none of the normal teenage experiences. When Dana became pregnant at 18 years old, the show's producers faced a dilemma. Television's perfect daughter couldn't be an unwed mother in 1984. Rather than working her pregnancy into the story, executives wrote her out of the show almost entirely. In the unforgiving landscape of 1980s television, there was no room for a young woman's real-life choices to intrude on her character's wholesome image. Cast adrift from the only professional family she'd known, Dana's life began a downward spiral. The next decade brought substance abuse struggles, financial hardship, and a desperate attempt to remain relevant in an industry that had labeled her difficult and unreliable. In a heart-wrenching appearance on The Howard Stern Show in May of 1999, Dana insisted she was finally sober and ready for a comeback. Listeners called in, many questioning her sobriety and mocking her fall from grace. She remained composed, defended herself with dignity against the cruelty. The very next day, Dana Plato was found dead from an overdose of prescription medication. She was only 34 years old. What makes Dana's story particularly devastating is how predictable it seemed to those watching from the outside. Another child star gone too soon, another cautionary tale. But that perspective misses the human being at the center, a talented young woman who never had the chance to discover who she might have been beyond the role that defined her childhood. Now, not every behind-the-scenes story ends in tragedy, and sometimes the most inspiring tales come from those who recognized the pitfalls of early fame and chose a different path entirely. If you watched The Wonder Years in the late 80s and early 90s, you'll remember Josh Saviano as Kevin Arnold's best friend, the lovable, nerdy Paul Pfeiffer. For 6 seasons, Saviano brought heart and humor to the role, becoming one of television's most recognizable young faces. Then, when the series ended in 1993, something unusual happened. Josh Saviano effectively disappeared from Hollywood. Now, while his co-stars like Fred Savage continued in entertainment, Saviano made a conscious decision to step away from the cameras. He returned to a normal life, attended Yale University, and later became a successful attorney. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The entertainment industry and public couldn't accept that a child star would simply choose a different life. An absurd rumor began circulating that Josh Saviano was actually musician Marilyn Manson. The bizarre conspiracy theory persisted for years, with fans creating elaborate evidence comparing their facial features. What does it say about our culture that we'd rather believe a child actor transformed into a controversial rock star than accept that he simply chose a stable, successful life outside of fame? Saviano later revealed in rare interviews that he found the rumors amusing but also disturbing. He had made a healthy choice to pursue education and a career that interested him, yet people couldn't accept this normal trajectory. They needed a more dramatic narrative. Josh Saviano's story highlights the impossible expectations placed on young performers: either stay in the limelight forever or crash and burn trying. His choice to define success on his own terms represents a road not taken by many of his peers, and perhaps one that could have saved some of the lives we've lost to the darker side of fame. Some behind-the-scenes tragedies remind us just how young many of television's most memorable performers truly were, and how vulnerable they remained despite their outsized presence in our living rooms. While most people remember Heather O'Rourke for her chilling line, "They're here," in the 1982 horror classic Poltergeist, television audiences in the early 80s knew her as Heather Feister on Happy Days. From 1982 to 1983, she appeared in 12 episodes of the iconic sitcom, playing the sweet daughter of Fonzie's girlfriend. Her blonde curls, cherubic face, and natural charisma made her a standout even among the show's veteran cast. It was actually her work on Happy Days that led to her casting in Poltergeist. Steven Spielberg spotted her eating lunch on the Paramount lot while visiting the Happy Days set and immediately knew she was perfect for the role that would make her famous. This crossover between television and film success made her one of the most recognizable child actors of the early 80s. What few viewers realized was that behind those haunting blue eyes and television charm, Heather was battling serious health issues that went tragically misdiagnosed. In early 1987, doctors incorrectly believed she was suffering from Crohn's disease. The misdiagnosis meant that her actual condition, an acute bowel obstruction caused by a congenital stenosis, went untreated. On February 1st, 1988, Heather collapsed at her home and was rushed to the hospital. During emergency surgery, doctors discovered that her condition had progressed to the point where septic shock had set in. Despite their efforts, Heather O'Rourke died on the operating table. She was just 12 years old. The television and film industry that had been eager to capitalize on her unique look and talent had failed to notice a desperately ill child. Directors, producers, and even parents often viewed child actors as professionals first and children second, creating an environment where pushing through illness was considered part of the job. Heather's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood and raised serious questions about the welfare of child performers. Her Happy Days co-stars, particularly Henry Winkler, spoke publicly about the devastating loss and the need for better protection for young actors. Yet even in tragedy, the entertainment industry couldn't resist exploitation. Poltergeist 3 was released just 4 months after her death, with promotional materials highlighting her final performance. Now, not every television tragedy involves the actors we recognize. Sometimes the most heartbreaking stories happen to those just beyond the camera's frame. If you're a Full House fan, you'll probably remember the Olsen twins as Michelle Tanner, the adorable youngest daughter, who stole scenes with catchphrases like, "You got it, dude."
Mean you climbed over the bars and jumped down all by yourself?
You got it, dude.
What many viewers don't know is that child labor laws limit how long young actors can work on set, which means child stars often have stand-ins who rehearse lighting and blocking when the principal actors are off-set. For several seasons of Full House, Savannah Smile served as the stand-in for the Olsen twins, While her face never appeared on camera, she spent countless hours on set, essentially learning the same lines and participating in the same working environment as the show's stars, but without the fame or substantial compensation. In a later interview, Saviano revealed the psychological toll of being the invisible Michelle. She watched the Olsen twins receive adoration for performances she had essentially helped create, while her family struggled financially despite her television work. The experience left emotional scars. Saviano developed depression and self-worth issues, feeling she wasn't good enough to be the real Michelle. Her identity had been shaped by being a literal stand-in, good enough for the work, but not for recognition. Unlike the most publicized tragedies of well-known child stars, Saviano's story represents hundreds of young performers who work in the shadows of television production. These children experience many of the same pressures and disruptions to normal development as their famous counterparts, but without the financial compensation or public support systems that sometimes follow fame. Saviano eventually found healing through therapy and by connecting with other former stand-ins and child performers who shared similar experiences. Her advocacy work has helped bring attention to the invisible children of television production, pushing for greater protections and mental health support for all young people working in entertainment. Sometimes, the brightest stars on television hide their true selves behind the characters we love, carrying burdens we never see until years later. For millions of Americans in the 80s and early 90s, Danny Pintauro was simply Jonathan Bauer, the lovable son on ABC's hit comedy, Who's the Boss? From 1984 to 1992, he grew up in front of a national audience, evolving from a cute child actor to a teenager while starring alongside Tony Danza and Judith Light. Behind his character's wholesome image, Danny was navigating a complicated reality. As a gay teenager in Hollywood during the late 80s and early 90s, he felt intense pressure to hide his sexual identity. This was an era when being openly gay could instantly end a career, especially for someone known for playing a wholesome character on a family-friendly show. The constant fear of being outed created immense psychological stress for the young actor. In interviews years later, Pintauro revealed that he lived in true terror that tabloids would expose him before he was ready. His worst fears came true in 1997 when the National Enquirer threatened to out him, forcing him to come out publicly before he was emotionally prepared. After Who's the Boss ended, Danny struggled to find consistent work in Hollywood. Like many child actors, he found that the industry had little interest in him as an adult performer. The typecasting that had made him famous now limited his opportunities. In 2015, Pintauro revealed another painful secret during an interview with Oprah Winfrey. He disclosed that he had been diagnosed as HIV positive in 2003, the result of risky behavior during a period when he struggled with crystal meth addiction. The addiction had begun in the early 2000s as he grappled with his identity and the challenges of life after child stardom. What makes Danny's story particularly poignant is how he transformed his struggles into advocacy. Rather than hiding his HIV status, he chose to speak openly about it, using his platform to raise awareness about HIV prevention and the dangers of crystal meth in the gay community. Today, Pintauro works as a veterinary technician and restaurant manager while continuing his advocacy work. His journey represents both the heavy toll of hiding one's true self under the spotlight and the possibility of finding purpose through personal challenges. In an industry that encouraged him to present a false image to protect his career, Danny ultimately found freedom and purpose by embracing his authentic self, even when that meant walking away from the fame that had defined his childhood. Few stories illustrate television's callous treatment of young actors better than what happened to Jaimee Foxworth on Family Matters. From 1989 to 1993, Foxworth portrayed Judy Winslow, the youngest daughter in the Winslow household. For 4 seasons, she was part of one of America's most beloved sitcom families, appearing in nearly 100 episodes. But as the show increasingly centered around the breakout character Steve Urkel, network executives made a shocking decision. Instead of developing Judy's character or writing her out with a proper storyline, they simply erased her from existence. In what has become one of television's most infamous character disappearances, Judy Winslow walked upstairs in one episode and never came back down. She was never mentioned again. No explanation was offered to viewers. The character, and by extension the young actress who played her, was deemed completely disposable. At just 13 years old, Jaimee Foxworth found herself abruptly unemployed and erased from a show where she had been a core cast member. The psychological impact was devastating. In interviews years later, she described feeling discarded and worthless, questioning her value both as an actress and as a person. Like many child actors who suddenly lose their source of income, Foxworth's family faced financial hardship after her dismissal from the show. The residual payments actors typically receive from reruns could have provided some financial stability, but Foxworth had been signed to a contract that minimized these payments, a common practice with child actors in the 80s and 90s that took advantage of parents' limited knowledge of industry contracts. As she entered her late teens, Foxworth struggled to find work in an industry that had already written her off. Casting directors saw her only as the girl who was written out of Family Matters, if they remembered her at all. Facing mounting financial pressures and limited options, at age 19, she made the difficult decision to appear in adult films under the stage name Crave. This brief period in the adult entertainment industry would haunt her career for years to come, making it even more difficult to return to mainstream acting. The industry that had discarded her as a child now judged her for the choices she made to survive. In the 2000s, Foxworth battled substance abuse issues and depression, challenges she has spoken about openly in an effort to help others. After becoming a mother in 2009, she found new purpose and began rebuilding her life away from the entertainment industry. Jaimee Foxworth's story represents the callousness of an industry that treats young performers as commodities rather than human beings. Her character's erasure from Family Matters wasn't just a narrative decision. It was a symptom of a system where children are valued only as long as they serve the show's commercial interests. Today, Foxworth advocates for better protection for child actors, speaking out about the need for psychological support, improved contracts, and education for parents of young performers. Her journey from beloved sitcom daughter to being literally written out of existence stands as one of television's most disturbing behind-the-scenes stories. These stories represent just a fraction of the heartbreak behind shows that brought us joy. They're not meant to cast shadows over our memories, but to remind us that behind every character was a real person with real struggles, dreams, and fears. Television makes us feel connected to people we've never met. We invite these characters into our homes week after week, and they become, in a strange way, part of our extended families. Perhaps the most meaningful way we can honor the legacy of these performers is to remember them as complete human beings, not just for the roles they played or the tragic circumstances of their deaths, but for the full complexity of their lives. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues, substance abuse, or thoughts of suicide, please reach out for help. If you found this video meaningful, please consider subscribing to Remember When. We're committed to exploring the untold stories behind the pop culture that shaped us and treating these subjects with the respect and nuance they deserve. Thank you for taking this journey with us today. Until next time, this is Remember When, reminding you that every story deserves to be remembered, even the difficult ones.